Hello, Nick.
Hello, Jeff. Thanks for having me on.
Well, since I think it's been a few months, been about 3 or 4 months since we met
Yep.
in the back of Trevor's car.
Yep.
While he was trying to find medication, we are trying to figure out a place to eat. And I thought, you know what? I got to have Nick on my podcast sometime.
You're like, I'm going to grab the most difficult person to eat with and have him on my podcast.
Well, you know, it was strange. I know Trevor a fair amount. I never met Brian before. And there's you, and you guys were like a kind of an eclectic trio. And I think with me added to the mix, it was just kind of funny. It was just kind of funny being I don't say an outsider, but an observer more so. It seemed like Trevor Stamper and Brian, they seemed like brothers, and
Yep.
they almost seem like two sides of the same coin, like wildly deep knowledge in certain things, but they have their different aspects, but yet they're welded together in a way that, like, I think between the two of them, you could probably understand any sort of esoteric thing that you need to know by asking them.
That's a very accurate assessment.
Yes. And then we got a punk rocker next to me. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. But not just any punk rocker, with a variety of experiences and also a pretty deep understanding of Dungeon Crawl classics and a YouTube channel and experience at Kickstarter. So I just thought, you know what, it's just kind of funny. You know, that's how games can be. We can have a eclectic group of people all together in a car, searching for dinner and having a good time, and having hardly ever met before. So I thought, you
Yep.
know what.
Yeah, no, that was a good evening. It was a good con, but it was a good evening.
I was pretty burned out. Work's been pretty stressful, and the Kickstarter stuff got me pretty stressful. And I just thought, you know what, just spend some time hanging out, and that's what it was.
Yeah, for
Hanging
sure.
out with people.
Indeed. Indeed. But yeah, no, I'm surprised that Trevor and I seem to have become fast friends, because he comes from this world of academia, and as you said, he esoteric deep knowledge, and here I am, and he's also very like he's very by the book, because that's how
Yes.
academia is.
Yes.
And here I am, I'm this guy, and I'm like accounting, having an account, what is that? And just punk rock taught me that I could do anything that I wanted to do, and you just did it. And so when I ran into, like, I had wanted to be a game designer when I was a kid, and then I found punk rock and got deeply immersed in that for 20 years, and then came back full circle. And then all of a sudden, I ran into this game, Dungeon Crawl Classics, and there was a full zine culture around it. And I was just like, this is me in game form. And somehow I met Trevor through that, which is, it's just odd. But that's part of what I love about Dungeon Crawl Classics, is the way it draws all of these, and about gaming in general. It just draws all sorts of people from different walks of life together.
Well, I think, and I'm kind of more solely ebbing into Dungeon Crawl Classics. It definitely has a lot different vibe and feel
Yeah.
and direction and aesthetic.
Yeah.
And so it is very unusual, because it's kind of and even going back to, I've even used your YouTube videos for trying to understand things like the luck mechanic.
Well, I'm glad people are watching them. It makes me very happy. But yeah, no, one of the things that I found super interesting when I started making RPG content for Dungeon Crawl Classics was that so one of the artists that I worked with early on, this guy Mike Tommyrot, he was in a band called Black SS, Black Sheep Squadron, and he had fallen in love with art because of the Monster Manual and the Fiend Folio for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And then he got into like Fangoria magazines and what have you, and then stumbled into punk rock. And so I ended up working with him as an artist, and but he had been so far removed from gaming that he's like, oh, this is cool. This is like the stuff that I used to look at. But then when I did my Kickstarters for Rabid Dogs and The Precipice of Corruption, I noticed that, hey, a lot of these people that backed my campaign, they look like people that I know. And as it turned out, some of them were actually people that I know. Because one of the guys that's like big in the Pittsburgh DCC community, he was in a band called Crucial Unit, and my band played with his band a bunch of times.
Oh, neat.
So it was just funny that that there was this kind of like full circle moment where these people that I had been disconnected from for the last decade, all of a sudden were stumbling back into my life, because they were all punk rockers that got involved in gaming, then punk, and then back into gaming again.
Well, it's interesting because not only is it that they just got back into gaming, but to actually come in the direction that of material that you're writing content for is really pretty astounding.
Yeah.
So is it just because of, do you think, some sort of association and name they learned about you, or is it just that they actually gravitate to the same sort of stuff that you're writing?
It's definitely a gravitation thing. There is the combination of the aesthetic, because not everybody that makes third party DCC content goes deep into the like black and white, really kind of like harsh and brutal kind of aesthetic. But if you grew up like me, flipping through the Fiend Folio for hours and hours and hours, staring at Russ Nicholson, R.I.P. Art, you gravitate towards an aesthetic and a feel. And when I discovered Dungeon Crawl Classics, like the Gonzo stuff was interesting, but for me, the thing, like when I read about, in the DM section, there's a whole thing on keeping the world really small, and traveling is very dangerous, and there was all these things that really led me to think of it as a grim dark game as opposed to a Gonzo game. And so that was the direction that I went in, because for me, I wanted to feel more like Russ Nicholson art, than necessarily flying through space in a van, as cool as that might be.
Yeah, I find it to me, it's maybe I think the Fiend Folio, the best part was the art. In fact, I think most of the monsters were actually pretty lame, uninteresting nonsense.
Yeah, no, I in all honesty, there were a lot of monsters in the Fiend Folio that never saw light of day at my table anyway. But but the fact of the matter is it was probably, other than because the Monster Manual was one of the first books that I ever got. But in terms of just flipping through and looking at art for the sake of art, I think Fiend Folio was the book.
Right. It's almost, I didn't think about it. So now they're almost like in inverse relationship. Like there is some evocative Monster Manual art.
Yeah.
But really the magic really was in the creatures, the write-ups, where I think the Fiend Folio was the opposite.
Yeah.
It's just like the art's just absolutely spectacular. Almost every single piece. It's just that a lot of it's just like, oh, we get another version of an underwater or underground dweller. Okay. Yeah. Do I really need this? Or, it's just like, but and I think part of it's might also, especially with AD&D, with the system, there's not a lot of there wasn't a lot of variation that you could easily add, where I think much later the different powers and different things people started to add uniques became more common.
Mm. Yep. No, that's fair. That's fair. But yeah, no, there's just it's funny thinking back, and like I can picture the art for the Zvart in my head so vividly, and that was not one of the best pieces of art for sure.
No, they are all, I would say, yes, they're all kind of just as images. But there has been a number of things to The Eighth Yankee and was it the Githraeli?
Yeah.
Those are both really fun creatures. I mean, those are really probably the standouts of them all.
Mm.
It's kind of interesting. Some have, some have, like, I think the Death Knight probably continues, and maybe like and the Gifts and the I just thought of another one. I just dropped it, but there has been a few that actually have. Oh, the Kenku, I think, took on life of their own. But yeah, the rest of them are, just kind of here and there. So it was really the reading of the GM's advice. So do you think if it hadn't, I guess, what would alternate world look like if they didn't have that GM's advice about the small world? Like,
So this is interesting. So I am a Greyhawk super fan. And so when I first got the DCC quick start rules, because that's where I started, I got the DCC quick start rules, and it doesn't have a lot of supplemental information. So I was like, I flipped through it. I was like, the concepts are cool. I love the art. All of this connects with me. But originally I was like, I'm just gonna write create my own little dungeon, set it in the Yeomanry, in Greyhawk, and that's I'm just gonna run an adventure for my friends and see how it goes. And it was when I got the DCC rulebook as a birthday present from my friend Hal that I actually read the DM advice, and that is when my brain got cranking, and I started, just instead of like trying to relive my past with Greyhawk, I was like, oh no, this is fuel for what I want to create. And so pushed the Greyhawk map off to the side and was like, all right, let's do this. And I listened to a lot of Celtic Frost and Merciful Fate, and just went for it. So
yeah, like that scene in the Blues Brothers where they're in the church and Jake has a light come down on his face. I see the light.
yep. And then I started doing backflips down the aisle.
So it's kind of funny. At least that's how I can be sometimes. Is you kind of have an idea, another idea, and then you smash them together, and it's like, whatever the by the power of Grayskull or whatever. It's a transformation experience where all of a sudden it's like, now I understand the pattern. I understand how the universe works.
Yep.
I'm on a vision quest.
Yeah, no, it's funny how that stuff works. In fact, the thing that I always go back to when talking about how all of my little zine empire started, all goes back to a line from a Celtic Frost song that I misheard, because I didn't have the lyric sheets to this record, to Megatherion by Celtic Frost. But there's a line that I always heard, and I've been listening to this record since I was a teenager, and I always heard the line as "the crops have failed." And so the whole premise behind my whole setting is that there's a famine because the crops have failed. And as it turns out, when I finally did go looking for the lyric, and I typed that line into Google, the crops have failed, Celtic Frost, nothing comes up. And I started digging through the lyrics to every single one of the songs. It's actually "the cross has failed."
Wow.
So a little darker.
It is.
But regardless, it's because of one misheard lyric that I had misheard for 30 years that all of my zine empire exists.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how it is. You wonder, but there may have been something else your brain would have latched onto for whatever reason. But
No.
Right, so something from your youth, you heard it. It was very, I guess. Did you ever see? Is the you probably never seen Sarah Plain and Tall, have you?
What is it?
Sarah Plain and Tall.
No.
It's a Christopher Walken movie
Okay.
with I forget who's the one, that real famous actress, I forget her name. But there was a second to the series where he go and I think she leaves to go to the coast or home, and he's on the porch rocking in the rocking chair watching the fields die. And
Yep.
it's just a very, they're enjoying the rain of the east as it's coming from the ocean, and he's just rocking back and forth just watching the crops just die. So
Dark. I like it.
yeah, it's like, and so anyway, so that led to the setting. So what is the name of the setting?
Um, I just call it Stennard. It's not the greatest name, but that's the town. It's interesting that some people, and this comes up a lot in RPG discourse, is some people, they get the idea for their world and they like want to build this world. And I, on the other hand, I start at the smallest common denominator, and I'm like, okay, um, you know, I started D&D with, the Keep on the Borderlands and the Village of Hamlet. And so when I started writing this adventure, I was like, I need a town. And so I came up with the name Stennard, and wrote down, I drew a map that's not entirely the same as the map that's actually in the book or in the zine. But I, drew up this map and came up with the names for some people, and that was the start. I had a town and I had a dungeon, and let's go for it. And I just keep adding pieces on and building it out, so that it is a fully fleshed out thing. But yeah, my whole design aesthetic is start small and build on things, which was perfect for when I was reading, the DM notes in the or judge notes in the DCC rulebook, because that really worked with my brain and how I go about things. Your world is small, everything, nobody travels more than 50 miles, and you don't know anything more than the next town over. And that, for how I design things, that was perfect. So
Well, I think there's two good ideas behind, or good reasons for doing the way you're doing. One is it's a much more sensible approach to design, because in a sense, nobody, it's kind of like a viewer of a television show. Nobody sees except what's on camera.
exactly.
Everything else, it's like nobody knows or even probably even cares. I mean, really, probably, much of the stuff that goes on in the background, no player cares about, but just the GM cares. But I think the other one is by confining it, the the actions that the characters make have much more personal stakes,
Yes.
and they're in this environment. They can't necessarily really leave this. It's not like, it's a hard part about Star Wars. You're in a different planet. You're in a different
Yep.
planet. It's like, if you're confined, it's like you got to live with the situation you're creating, both good
Yeah.
and bad.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because uh, during the pandemic, I was playing in a regular group that was playing Scum and Villainy online. And Scum and Villainy, if you're not familiar, it's a story game that is based on the Forged in the Dark system, and it is Star Wars or Firefly or Cowboy Bebop. You can turn it into any of those things, but that's the intent of it. And uh, our game master was, sending us to different planets, but in order to create something evocative for different planets, so that you like have this like idea, oh, this is what this planet is like, it's a lot of work. And so they struggled with you know it they seem to struggle with, trying to make each planet feel unique. Instead, you kind of like the like on Tatooine, Mos Eisley, you just kind of get this like micro shot of something, because that's all you really are going to interact with, but also all you have time for as a designer, especially when you're just making stuff off the fly, off of prompts. But yeah, but one of the things that we talked about in the car that also connects to all of this stuff is that it also worked for my brain because I recently had figured out that I have ADHD. And so I gravitated to the zine culture of DCC and also, this design principle because I can get my brain focused on something for 32 pages. But once I start to exceed 32 pages, I kind of fall apart. And so I was able to, okay, I'm gonna do a zine that is just evil priest spells, or I'm gonna do a zine that is just this one encounter spread out over 20 pages. And so it was something that allowed me to just also build in micro increments based upon what my brain could focus on for a certain amount of time.
Well, I think it's, in a sense, it works out really well, doing that. I mean, it can be overwhelming trying to do something massive. And in fact, you may not even have the skills to really do something massive too,
Yeah.
starting out. So, you do a few zines here, do a few zines there, and you're like, okay, maybe my next one will be a little bit bigger, and maybe it never will. But
Yeah.
I mean, you start to kind of get in a flow and in understanding and develop the muscles, and pretty soon it's like, generally with every project I do, I generally, especially with layout, I try to learn one or two new things.
Mm. Yeah, same. Actually, I got dragged kicking and screaming into doing layout. I actually just saw an on this day or memories thing on Facebook from 2011 where I was railing about how Photoshop made me want to smash my computer into pieces. And my um, friend Hal, who bought me the DCC rulebook, he and I met. We were introduced. We both are old. He's actually much younger. He's a early 30s punk rock guy. I'm a late 40s punk rock guy. But we got introduced to each other because we both had an interest in gaming and punk. And so he found out that I was designing this game called Broken Contract, which was my first project before I got involved in DCC, and it's a sci-fi thing. And he got super excited about it, and so we became fast friends. And he originally was doing all my layout work for me, and him being a young guy, and he's from like the maker community. He's one of those guys that the way you learn is by doing. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But I hate this, so you do this. And a point was reached where he was finishing up his computer science degree, and he just didn't have time to do layout for me anymore. And he's like, I'm going to build you a computer that can handle InDesign, and I'm going to show you how to use InDesign, and you're going to do this yourself. I'm like, I don't want to. And he, as I said, dragged me kicking and screaming. He would show me how to do certain basic things, and now it's like, anytime I get stuck, I know that I can lean on him, but ultimately, I am now self-sufficient because of him. The teach a person to fish analogy. But yeah, I am super grateful that there are people like him that can convince me that learning new things is always the best option.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So I know for me, as we discussed, I've not been diagnosed at all, and don't have the HD or hyperactive part, but I definitely have, I think, attention deficit. I hate to say deficit because it doesn't even feel like attention deficit, but it's because we have really good attention. Sometimes it's just
So that's when you learn about it, you find out that your brain is easily distracted, but you can hyper focus on the things that you're interested in.
Yeah.
It's like anything else that you're not interested in just kind of gets pushed out of your brain.
Yeah, even if something I'm not very interested in, I can finagle myself to hyper focusing on that. But I do find, I think, too many things starts becoming exhausting, and I do find myself going down, being distracted. Work can be bad just because there's too many things going on at once, and I have to sometimes create a list and then follow that list regardless of Oh, I'm doing a thing. Well, I need to check my email to see this guy responded. Well, I check my email. It's like, well, wait a minute. There's another email that's shown up since that. It's like, stop.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm very much I have to do a thing. I can't read instructions. I normally have to do it. Fail, then the best bet is to watch a YouTube video.
Yes. Same.
And so I think I was pretty fortunate with I think because I spent so much time with Photoshop, not extreme amount. I've done a fair amount of Photoshop, so I was already familiar with layers and such. So it wasn't hard for me to take the next step to layout. But I think what's nice about layout is there are rules, and you can learn the rules. And so there is a structure and order that you can create. It may not always be the most imaginative, but you follow certain rules. It's like, like for instance, like there are certain types of fonts that are great for text.
Yep.
Just stay with those. There's a certain font size. Stay with that. I mean, there's and you can build up just by learning the simple rules and have something that's adequate.
Yeah, I know. All of that part was easy. That was the easy stuff. Wrapping text around images and things like that. That's where I was like, oh, this is awful. I hate this.
Yeah.
But I learned it.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because I also use Publisher as well, Affinity Publisher. So I've used them both InDesign. They both have their good points and their bad points, but boy, InDesign sure is clunky, but it still does some things very well. It's a standard, I guess.
Yeah, I haven't messed with Affinity at all. Once I learned a thing, I was like, okay, I'm going to stick with this thing. Luckily I'm not paying a monthly subscription, so.
Well, that helps. So I'll see. The thing is, my daughter has been paying, so it's worked out for me to use the Adobe. But I've already paid for the other, and I feel it's kind of, there's always a possibility that Affinity could go under. I mean, any company can, but since it's not a subscription service, I still have the product. And so in a sense, it kind of future proofs it for me. But again, also I still occasionally use that InDesign, and I definitely use Photoshop because nothing really beats Photoshop for doing certain things.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't rely on it heavily, because it still frustrates me. But there are certain things like when I build stat blocks, things like that, I do all that in Photoshop, and then everything else is all InDesign.
So the beauty of Publisher or with Affinity is that if you're doing Publisher, you can switch between the designer and with photo easily. Like you just click a button and you're in the next program. And it all works well.
Yeah.
It just doesn't have all the full features, especially with the photos. It doesn't compare. If you're just doing minor stuff, it's fine. But it's not Photoshop. Yeah. The content aware fill is just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it saved me a lot of time, especially doing photography. So you've been, how long have you been doing the layout for your work?
Let's see. What year did Precipice of Corruption came out? That was the last thing that he worked on. So Precipice of Corruption was 2020. So yeah, I think I started doing all my layouts 2 years ago, two and a half years ago. So yeah, that was the turning point. Was like, okay, yeah, here, this is all you. But now it's since I've gotten comfortable with it, and I definitely do lots of cheater things, like if I know that I'm going to do another pamphlet, because I like doing pamphlets for my Patreon, I just pull up the previous pamphlet and then save it as a new file, and then I just start swapping everything out. Because rather than build it all from scratch, it's like, okay, here. The only thing that I run into with that is then uh, when I'm doing the proofing, I just got to make sure that, you know, there's nothing
Yes.
left behind from the previous thing.
What you could do is you could save as a template
Yeah.
and then just remove the text and just put like a couple words for the heading, text, whatever, and then is I'm the same thing, because that's the thing I also suffer from. It's those details that will get us.
Yes.
It's like,
Yeah.
and in fact, it happens even to the even happens to the bigger publishers. I think somebody actually put some non-commissioned art into a book, just intended it for a placeholder,
Yep.
and then all of a sudden it got published. It's like, oops. It's like we didn't pay for this art. It's like,
I can totally see how that could happen. You know, I there's one of the pamphlets I did for Patreon. I wish I had it in front of me, but I basically cut and pasted the NPC description because it was a chart with 16 NPCs, and I originally cut and pasted the exact same NPC 16 times, and then went in and edited all the details. And the lawful the lawful aligned dog is listed as its motivations: hates civilized society. That doesn't make any sense.
well, actually, I hate to say this, Nick, but I think that's rather good. In fact, I would say that I would lean into that one. I think that's actually pretty stinking good. If you're gonna make any mistake, that's like probably one of the best mistakes to make.
So if anybody's listening to this has around the common fire, I'm sorry. The lawful dog hates civil society. But you know, these things happen.
Well, yeah, and sometimes dogs do hate civil society. That's why they're out. That's why they run out in the wild.
But that also is that's one of the disadvantages of with my Patreon. I produce content every month, and I ship content every month, and so there's that grind. It's like right now, you know, we're already 5 days into June, and I usually like to ship a project the first week of June, and so I'm uh, smashing together this month's pamphlet. I was smashing it together over the weekend, and it's like, all right, you know, I got to get this done. I got to keep the patrons happy, but at the same time, I got to make sure that it's something that they're going to want to use. And so there's that drive that I got to get this done, but it's got to be good and not have hates civil society for a dog.
I don't know. I think there ought to be a dog or an animal in some way in each module or whatever that has some zine has some sort of weird quirk.
Nope.
And for a GM, it's like, you could put that dog and maybe all it does is stares at the adventurers and then shakes his head and walks away. You're just like left wondering. You feel judged.
I mean, dogs are very good at being judgy, so I can see it.
Yeah. And so so there's a lot of different ways to try and generate money, whether it's just trying to pay for costs of materials and paying for subscriptions to Photoshop and whatnot. But so one's Kickstarter, but the other one is Patreon. So how long have you been doing the Patreon?
Patreon has been going, I think, I'm just gonna look rather than talking out of my behind. But it's been either 1 or 2 years. I think it's been a year and a half, but let's take a look. My first patron was June 9th, 2021. So yeah, I guess we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary. So and it's Patreon. I had to really struggle with Patreon at first because I needed to figure out what my niche was, not in terms of what type of content I was going to create, because I based it on my DCC Stennard setting from the start. But it was one of those things where, you know, you know, when I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna treat it like a blog and put up blog posts. There'd be months where I would put a bunch of stuff up, and then others where one of my loyal patrons would be like, "Hey, are we gonna get anything gameable this month?" I was like, "Oh, damn it!" Because sometimes when you're doing blog posts, you're not really thinking about the gameability of things. You're
Yeah.
just like, "Oh, hey, this is my latest YouTube video," or "Hey, I've been thinking about this lately." But people wanted content that they were going to use, and so then I got this idea that I just wanted to crank out something small because I was in a real rut the summer of last year, because I had this management job and it was super stressful and I couldn't focus on anything. And I was like, I like this idea of these mothership pamphlet adventures. I'm going to make a pamphlet for DCC. And so I made this pamphlet, and because there were some people that had been waiting a long time for one of my Kickstarter rewards, I just sent everybody that had filled out their survey this pamphlet. And I was like, wait, this is something I could pull off every month. This is something I could do. And when I switched to that, then the combination of having my regular YouTube videos and the Patreon with monthly content that gets shipped to people's houses, then it actually turned into something that was worthwhile for them and worthwhile for me. So
Yeah, it's definitely goes to show. It's like, I've dabbled in a lot of things, but the problem is it's like you really have to put a focus and figure it out. It's not easy. I mean, what we're doing, but once you start figuring out the path,
yep.
it becomes easier once you start to see it. So, yeah, I've tried a number of different things, and I use the Patreon just to cover my Zoom costs, but I've not really have not figured out how. I guess I don't know what I'm doing with a lot of things. I don't really know what I'm doing with Twitter. I don't know what I'm really doing on Facebook. I really don't know what I'm doing with Patreon. The only thing I seem to know what I'm doing is with Kickstarter. That's the only thing I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, no, it's funny. You watch certain people, and certain people are masters. Like Levi Combs is a master of Twitter and just social media, because he manages to put out something every single day, and and just projects this positivity out into the world in a way that I can't. And so you watch certain people like that, and of course that's going to garner a ton of goodwill. And then you look at Necrotic Gnome, Gavin Norman. He's got his Dolmenwood Patreon, and that was a thing. I mean, OSE blew up just because of how well it's laid out, but also people were religious followers of his Patreon because he constantly put out content that people could use, and that tied into stuff that he had done. And so people just, they gravitate to that sort of thing. And so it's really about finding your niche and just running with it. And yeah, I mean, you've done very well with Kickstarter. I've done pretty good with Kickstarter. But
well, you may actually have to look. I have to go back and look at your numbers. You actually may be doing better than me.
yeah,
This is what's funny.
I don't know. I like this last Kickstarter was 4,800. The best Kickstarter that I ever had was under 8,000. And Fate of the Fly God, how much did you do on that one?
No, it was not including postage. It was probably like 60. I think it's probably about 6,800.
Okay.
But
But you just took the postage out.
Yeah, but yeah, none of mine have postage anymore.
Okay, gotcha.
But 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 my costs are high for that.
Yeah.
So the actual, when I say better, like for instance, you posted something on your 4,000. I think for your latest Kickstarter, you said if I hit over 4,000, I can make my was it my mortgage payment for the year?
My essentially, if I did 1,500, I can pay my mortgage for a month. If I get 4,000, I basically can cover my mortgage for 3 months. But
Oh, 3 months, yeah.
yeah, but it is worth noting that I live in this tiny house. So I engineered my whole life in order. So we're gonna take a really quick deep dive into my life and my brain. So in my 30s, I had made the decision. I had gotten my second wind in punk rock, and I was like, punk is my life. This is what I want to do. I want to be in a touring band. I want to do my record label, and I'm going to engineer my whole life in order to be able to do that. I was single at the time, and so I literally I took a day job that I hated, and used that to I was leasing apartments in a luxury high-rise building in Chicago, and I parlayed all of that into, and I only did it 6 months a year. And so I would work for 6 months and then do band stuff for 6 months. And I did that for 4 years, and that was my whole life. And it wasn't until a woman came into my life, and I was like, okay, I'm going to switch gears because I want to, settle down with this woman, yada yada. And so my whole life was engineered around that. And so fast forward to last year, and my uh relationship ended, and I was like, what am I going to do now? And so I ended up deciding that I was going to buy a house that allowed me to live on my zines. And so this house that I'm saying, my mortgage payment is $400 a month. And so I chose a neighborhood that was adjacent to the neighborhood that I wanted to be in, but was a neighborhood that people don't generally want to be in. It's funny though, because I absolutely love it. But I've got different standards and different things that I look for in a neighborhood. But I engineered my life so that I could do this thing. And so it's a choice, and most people don't have the luxury of being able to make that choice.
Right. But I think even going back to with your zines, it's like it's your costs too. I mean, if you keep your costs down, that's why I looked at Tom Wilson, Tom Wilson. I mean, I looked at his zines, his Kickstarter, like it's like 3,500, but it's like it's all stock art. He wrote all the content himself. I mean he's making a $3,500 Kickstarter. He's making margin wise way better than I am, like way better. And but it doesn't seem to hurt. So, but it just doesn't seem like he's been consistent. So it's like, to me, I'm like, of course, everybody has their own things in life, but it's like if you can consistently, I'm thinking like, Tom, if you could consistently put that stuff out, you'd be doing really pretty good.
Yeah.
Which is what you're doing. And I don't know how much. I've not gone through your actually gone through your zines and such, and knowing artwork costs and things like that. But if you keep the costs down, like with even with me with over 4,000 with Scoundrels of Brixton, it's mostly a break even from a practice standpoint.
Yeah, it's funny when you're like on margin, and I'm like, yeah, I don't calculate any of that. I just know that my mortgage is paid, and my dogs are fed, and all right, we barrel forward. But it's one of those things where it's like, because I don't calculate those things. I feel like a poser when I say this, but because I don't calculate those things. I just look at things like, oh, okay, the money from Tragedy at Woodwitch Rise is I've got this much set aside in the house savings account, and I've got this much set aside in the Kickstarter savings account, for printing costs and all of that. So these monies are separated. I'm like, okay, how much time do I have before I have to launch another Kickstarter to keep on the treadmill? And so it's like, all right, we're getting close to time to launch another Kickstarter. I wish I was better with spreadsheets and calculating costs and all of that stuff, but I just throw it at the wall and see what sticks and keep barreling forward.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, and I'm not as good as I should be, especially following up and all that. But I definitely, it's very important to me to know whether I'm losing money or making money, because my goal is to never ever lose money on a Kickstarter. But everyone's that, especially when you're putting money out. See, the beauty of what you're doing is you've created, as you're doing your setting, that's your IP, and and you're building upon that single thing. For me, I'm still doing a bunch of odds and ends.
Yep.
And it's hard to really. Some things are starting to build, like Gary's Appendix is building. I'm hopefully over time, Scoundrels will build, but but in a sense, it's like I'm going to put this much money into this. I have no idea if anybody's going to buy it or not. That's what's hard. But at least I think for where you're at, you are experienced enough that without a spreadsheet, you still looking at your bank accounts, what's going on. Like,
yeah,
you can't necessarily put it down on a piece of paper, but there's something in the back of your mind, like, okay, it's time.
Yeah. No, it is totally a matter of looking at the bank account and looking how the levels are fluctuating. All right, I gotta launch the next thing. Which isn't it's funny. I feel like a bad adult when I say things like that, but it goes back to the the ADHD brain, and I have been like this my entire life, and so it's just how things make sense. So it is what it is.
Yeah, and I think and as long as it's successful, it's not really. Am I successful? I mean, it's meeting those needs. So it's like, if you're saying I'm going to make a living off this, and you're making a living off that, it's working.
Yep. Yeah, no, for sure. One of the things that you said a second ago that that's interesting and looking at. So one of the things about with me building on an IP is that yes, I have, like, I will see the same names every single Kickstarter, which warms my heart. But because there are people that they're invested. They're like, when I get messages that people are running my content or what have you, and that they especially some of my patrons are really like into it and are running Stennard campaigns right now.
Oh, wow.
That's such an awesome feeling. But sometimes I worry that I am going back to the same well too often, and I'm not bringing in people because I'm not making other stuff. And one of the things that I look at the success of your Kickstarters, and like especially like a guy like Levi, is that he's his stuff isn't interconnected. He's got a shtick, but none of it's connected, and at least not in a deep way.
Right.
But at the same time, he's got his ardent fans, because of the fact that they know that they're going to get a certain level of quality from him. It's going to hit certain notes because of the nostalgic influences that he pulls off of. And I think that though there is value to how I do things, I think in a way, even though it's scarier for you because you don't know what's going to hit, I think there is definitely a value to creating content that is varied and disparate, and not necessarily you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, as they say, which I definitely have been.
Yeah, and I think for me, the reason I haven't, but I think it's brain wiring is probably a lot of it. And I don't know if it's me, there's a lot of things I'm interested in doing, or I couldn't just do the one thing continuously. Maybe that's it too. Maybe I can't just do the same thing day in day out for years. It would drive me crazy. That might really be the reason.
Yeah.
I might create some sort of economic justification, but it just may come down to I can't do it any other way.
That's one of the things with, if I knew when I had started this that I was okay, I'm just going to build this setting. Let's say there was a friend of mine that did a Kickstarter that he was going to do this lavish hardcover book all on this particular setting that he did, and then he got all the money in, and then he did like a $20,000 Kickstarter, and then he flaked on everybody, and it just killed me to see somebody do that, especially somebody that I had an online friendship with, and had met at a couple of cons, but he did this thing where he had this idea that he was gonna put everything into one thing, and then he just fizzled. And that's why when I you know started doing stuff, it's like, I'm gonna keep it small because I don't want that to ever happen, where
Right.
I over promise and under deliver. And and in his case, he just as I said, he just flaked on everybody. But if I had like this thing right here, the cover of The Precipice of Corruption, if The Precipice of Corruption had been just me and I didn't have Hal to support me and my editor Alex to support me, even that 30, how many pages is this thing, this 40-page module would have killed me, because I just had, it was big enough and involved enough that it was overwhelming. And to think that I was going to try and do a hardcover book or something like that, it would destroy me. Whereas with when I started creating the content for Stennard, like I mentioned that I did a book of evil priest spells, and it was like, hey, I don't want to, I'm not focused enough to do an adventure right now, but these evil priest spells, this is fun. This is an aside that I can do that works with my brain, that is loosely connected to this thing, but is not essential. And that's one of the things that's worked out for me, is the fact that all of my stuff, even though it all builds on the same thing, you can totally use the stuff separately because it's designed to be separate.
But then also the beauty is, in 3 years, let's say, you could go through, maybe get an editor, and you could put it together in a single volume and do your leather bound Kickstarter hardback for 20,000, and it's already ready to go.
That'll be pleather, sir.
Leather. Oh,
But
yes. No animals made in this product.
Exactly. But yeah, I'm actually, I had a really interesting conversation with Trevor about that, because he said, don't do that, because then you'll have this product that will be a flash thing that everybody will be interested in at one time, and then you'll invalidate all of your zines, and then people kind of like be not interested in that. He's like, the way you're doing things, he's like, people will keep continuing to buy your stuff, and they can buy it piecemeal and get what they want. And I've internalized that a lot lately, especially because The Precipice of Corruption, the second printing, is almost gone. After I shipped the Cleft in the Mangled Hills and Protectorate of Genuine Kickstarters, all of the copies of The Precipice of Corruption will be gone. And so I've started thinking about, okay, what would a deluxe edition of this adventure look like? And thinking about what Trevor said, I was thinking that I would like to do, like a hardbound, maybe the size of the Tomb of Black Sand by Jacob Hurst. Um, so the same size and scale as a OSE book, but hardbound, because that's essentially zine size, which even though I like this better for playing at the table, people, if they're going to get a deluxe edition, they want something fancy. But I would take bits and pieces from different zines, like some of the town information from the Stennard Courier Volume 1, so that people have enough information to be able to run the town, but still would have value for them to own the Stennard Courier Volume 1 if they wanted to go deeper into the town of Stennard. And
Yeah, you could
so,
also do color too. That's another option for your interior.
oh no, never.
Never. Well, wait a minute. You could just use the color red. There you go.
It's funny. I do love like in Trevor Zine's the risograph where he's got like a spot color or two spot colors. I absolutely love that aesthetic. But I would never do full color. Like, full color is for covers only. And only if it's something lavish, like an adventure where I want people to be able to like look at it and be like, oh, there's just something about the black and white aesthetic that is just more mysterious to me, and is part of what drew me into RPGs in the first place, and that's why I am such a jerk about full color.
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, it's definitely that's a valid choice to make. I mean, it really is, and I think in a sense, it's if you feel that's part of the aesthetic of your publications, you should be consistent with that.
Yeah, and it's working out so far. So nobody's ever posted a thing. Why don't you ever do full color? So I guess it's going okay.
Yeah, because I did during the Madlands in full color, and then the prices for color just went way up, and it seems like they actually backed down again. So who knows? I may do another. I do want to do another color book. It's just but it might be further down the maybe 2024, 25. We'll see.
Yeah. When I was doing my sci-fi game, Broken Contract, which was a miniature game, I went for a completely different aesthetic. I worked with digital artists instead of hand-drawn stuff, and it was all full color. And it's funny, if I were to do a new edition of Broken Contract now, I would switch to art that was drawn and or painted, and all the interior would be black and white instead of all full color.
Well, it definitely provides a more austere look and feel. Not saying you can't get that with color, but you'd have to definitely be very deliberate about your choices there. But I do find that and I think it goes back to what you want out of the setting. So, I mean, I think, especially if you're dealing with harsh conditions and maybe potential, like say, like a impoverished town. I'm not sure if Stennard's impoverished, but or horror. I mean, those all seem to work really well.
Yeah.
But then again, if you're wanting to do maybe weird fantasy or science fantasy, color may or may not be needed, but probably with the right art, probably the color could actually be really good.
Yeah, well, like Mothership is mostly black and white illustrations, but when you look at like Pound of Flesh or some of the things that they released for Mothership, it's like there'll be like one or two spot colors, and because Pound of Flesh is got pink thrown throughout it, and it feels sci-fi, but also has that gritty, mysterious quality at the same time. And so, yeah, I think if I were to go back and do Broken Contract now, I would lean into kind of how Mothership does things a little more than because the reason why I had gone full color was because of the fact that I wanted to emulate a lot of the other miniature games, and since everything is pictures of painted models, you have full color all throughout in order to because it works better with the picture the photos of painted models. But yeah, I don't think I would go that route again.
So do you own the models?
Oh, for my game, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
So are they 3D models?
What's interesting is that I have a drive full of STL files, and I was just talking with my buddy Hale about I should I should probably make those STLs available for sale at this point, um, so that because I do own those files, and it would be nice to continue to make money off of
Well,
because
but I was saying you could also, I think I've never done this, but you could also use them for the art.
you can, but it's no, it doesn't look right to me. It doesn't look right. Um, there's just something about the because I mean they're I don't know.
Well, and I understand that if you just have a gray model and you're taking a picture of it, but and this is something I've thought about because of the cost of art and wanting to do sci-fi of actually using I forget the not Blender, forget the free software program and getting models and
Mhm,
then just creating my own scenes
mhm.
and then using that, which I thought about doing, but then hubristically thinking that was a viable thing without really considering that it's probably going to take me 80 hours of attempts before I could finally probably come up with something that would be juvenile at best.
Yeah. No, that's the thing is that um like doing like the I own the STLs, but the reason why I don't do miniature games anymore is why I don't make miniature game content really anymore is because when I was a miniature company, making a mini like one miniature, the investment in terms of because I didn't do my own sculpting, uh, it was $1,000 per miniature
Yeah,
to go through the whole stage of and when you're release you do a Kickstarter usually like okay this is these five miniatures and so like the last Kickstarter I did for Broken Contract was called The Children of Farum Sky, and it was four like two kids, two teenagers and a dog, and it's like that was a $5,000 investment to get that Kickstarter up and running. And let's let's type I don't think I got $5,000 back. Here we go. The Kickstarter did. Come on. That Kickstarter did $2,597. So yeah. I mean, they're beautiful models. I'm looking at the picture right now. Gorgeous. But yeah, it that was a really hard business, much harder than the RPG business. But going
yeah,
back full circle to you and like if you're doing your own sculpts, yeah, that's cool, and it would allow you to position things and make scenes and what have you. But like the investment in time to
right.
do that would just be incredible, and if you're paying somebody to do the sculpting, the investment in dollars is
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily plan on paying anybody or buying sculpts. It's simply just saying, you know what, I really just need maybe a corridor of certain
yeah,
atmospherics or on a planet with a certain buildings and maybe some people in an action pose. But I don't
right.
necessarily need, you know, but it's just at that point I would need to find somebody that could actually do that kind of work I needed. And at that point, I might as well just be paying an artist. So just
Yeah. Yeah, no, like
wait.
I have an old friend from the Chicago punk scene that he um does what's the term? It's basically scene design for video games, and so he basically does 3D sculpting of, you know, a canyon or what have you, for you to run around and play you know, whatever first person shooter in or what have you. And I mean, even the amount of time that goes into that stuff, because they get really into it. Like he'll post things on Twitter, and it's like, you know, these are the best rocks I've ever done. You know, because you know you put in a lot of effort and time in order to. It's like any other form of art. So
Yeah, and that's what's it's hard. I mean, especially starting out, trying to. I mean, you at least I think some people have gotten by with some with little art or being very creative, but it's really hard to, gain the notice without having at least passable art.
yeah,
At least undercover.
yeah. Well, one of the things that because I originally didn't use any, or I shouldn't say any, I didn't use a lot of stock art. But then I discovered that a number of the artists that I work with actually have stock art portfolios on Drive Through RPG, and so my stuff, like you Desperation of the Hungry, which I just shipped, the cover art is a piece from Carlos Castillo that I bought off of Drive Through RPG. And it's interesting because I added an encounter, because I used that art because it loosely fit with the theme. But there's a tree and there's eyes in the tree. And I'm like, I got to pay off these eyes in the tree because they don't connect to anything else. So then I commissioned him to draw a monster, to represent the monster whose eyes you see glowing in the tree. But that particular zine only had one commissioned piece. All the rest of the art in that zine was from either it was recycled from previous zines or it was art from Carlos from Drive Through RPG. But the thing that's cool is that when you work with artists that do both, it's like you can have a total tonal consistency, um uh because the you're using the same artist both for commission and stock art.
Yeah, I think that is a good point too. And uh, in to me, the danger of stock art is with the covers, because I use Perplexing Ruins for Gary's Appendix One,
Mm-hmm.
loved it, and then 6 months later, somebody was doing a zine, some sort, using that same image for the cover,
That sucks.
and I'm like, you know, maybe that person, I don't know, the person was copying me or inadvertent copying me, or if it's just, the universe just, I mean, things happen like that. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, calculus comes out, two people not even related come up at the same time, whatever. But
Yep.
it's just like there's a point where I realize that, that I can't have stock art for a cover anymore. Like for me, I just can't. Like I don't
Yep.
care. It's like never.
Yeah. No, I feel that, like, a funny non RPG related story. Uh, a bunch of guys that I formed a band with in the early 2000s. We were in a band called No Time Left. We were all fans of a band called Anthem 88 from Florida, and in our first batch of songs that we wrote for our demo, uh, we had a bunch of songs, and there was a lot of bangers on there, but there was one song that, once we had been around for a year, somebody finally noticed that, um the one song was basically, it wasn't note for note an Anthem 88 song, but it was an Anthem 88 song. And so we ended up, dropping it from our set list and not re-recording it on any of our other stuff, because essentially it was like having the same cover,
Yeah.
on two releases. But the thing is that stuff like that happens. I get annoyed because now that punk has been around for 40 years now, the same band names are like there are like 10 bands that I follow right now that are recycled names from bands that existed 20 years ago. Because that sort of stuff happens, especially when we live in an age where all this content is accessible. So if you didn't order custom art, commissioned art for a cover, it's just like all the people that I've seen a million different renditions of the cover art of the original AD&D Player's Handbook, as a nod to the
Right.
AD&D Player's Handbook.
Yeah, and that's cool. And I think the thing is too, it's like, copying, we are all unconsciously copying all the time. It's just, but sometimes it's, we don't really, I'm sure musically it's even worse. I'm sure you're kind of picking along on something on a guitar, next thing you're doing something, you're going along and somebody says, hey, it's like, yes, you're right. It's like,
yeah. I have there's a band that I love from Chicago called the Repos, and when I was writing for my one band Poison Planet, I have titles for riffs that I wrote, and it'll say Repos Rip, because I was ripping off the Repos when I was trying to write this song. And it's not that I used note for note, but I was trying to write a song in the vein of the Repos. And so that was a way to mark off that, okay, this was the song that sounds like this.
So I think, that you've said what you said, I think we need a list of those, and those could be titles for sci-fi or cyberpunk adventures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Repos Rip.
Yep.
That could actually be a location.
But yeah. Yeah, what's his name? Joey Royale, DCC content creator, and also just a all around interesting RPG guy. He loves to tout Steal Like an Artist, and I've never read it. But the fact of the matter is that we're all drawing all of our influences into stuff, and it's interesting. Like, even if I try to write a song that sounds like the Repos, or I try to write like the whole thing behind the Precipice of Corruption was, I was trying to write a DCC adventure that was in the vein of my memories of the Keep on the Borderlands and Tomb of Horrors and the things that got me into role-playing games in the first place. And so I remember acquiring a copy of Keep on the Borderlands probably a year after I had written the first draft, and I was reading through some of the descriptions. I was like, how is it that the tone and feel of this description feels exactly the same as this thing that I wrote, 30 years later? And but at the same time, it was just me trying to channel my memories of this thing from 30 years ago. But we carry that stuff.
We do, and I think I find it's, I think even like with the AI art space, where there's still a lot of there's still a lot of heat and light coming from that whole discussion, and I think it's definitely something we need to discuss. But people have been copying art for like a long time. Like, in fact, every comic book artist, they could not survive without copying other panels. Either maybe not some trace, some copy. And then there's a Facebook forum called a group called Comic Book Swipes, and it's very interesting. I mean, that just how often it's done, and sometimes it's even done with movie stills. And I think the AI, and not to say that we don't need to figure out I'm not trying to uh, downplay the impact that AI art can have, but generated art, but a lot of the arguments they use are actually the things that artists typically do now.
Yeah.
Not all artists, but but in general, it's kind of been going on for a long, long time.
It's a complicated thing. I know I go back to music a lot. But during the pandemic, I read the biographies of both Public Enemy and the Beastie Boys. And one of the things that came up in both of those books was how in the 90s, when sampling was basically monetized, and the idea was artists felt like they were being ripped off by these hip hop artists, using these samples in their songs. But so there was backlash, and now some of the classic records of these bands would cost millions of dollars to make, just because of the amount of samples. But one of the things that is important, I think, when thinking about those early days of sampling versus sampling now, and also with AI art, is that in the days of Public Enemy, it's like a single song, they had to copy that sample onto a tape.
Yeah.
And then they layered those samples. And so, like, a single song might have 20 samples in it, 30 samples in it, that were all layered on top of each other to create something new. But somebody had to do it with their brain and be like, I wonder how this is going to be if I put these things together this way. Whereas with AI art, it's pulling all of those things, but it's not hand selecting those things, and it's not somebody figuring out how it's going to go together themselves. Right. And I think in that, the way that Chuck D and the members of Public Enemy would build samples and layer them, that was art. Whereas typing a bunch of prompts into a thing and being like, spit out this thing that I want. There's part of me that's there. I've got this conflict, because like when you were talking about designing 3D and then layering things together, and it's like the easier solution for you in what you were describing in that moment would just be to type in a bunch of prompts into AI and come up with a thing. But then there's that part of me that's like, but it's stealing all these things from these other people, and it's not you meticulously crafting that thing. It's just creating a bunch. And so I'm very conflicted. It's like this is this very powerful and interesting thing, but at the same time, it's pulling all these things from all of these people, and some of those people are people that are still trying to make a living off of their art right now. So it's
well, what's interesting, because this kind of, to me, kind of goes back to photography versus painting.
Yeah,
his portrait painting died for the most part once the camera was invented.
Yeah.
And I was listening to an amazing podcast called "The History of the World" and History of the World in History of Rock and Roll, and was it 500 songs or was it 100 songs? But well, anyway, the guy was talking about Andy Warhol, and he was an illustrator. So apparently, back in the 50s, they would not take pictures of products and put in magazines. They're all illustrated. And then once the photography was photographs were accepted as being a passable form into put into advertising, those jobs just went away.
Yeah.
And then it's like, even I work at Caterpillar, we used to be rooms of draftsmen. Once AutoCAD came online, all the draftsmen went away. It's just like, it is definitely a not fun situation as we start getting more and more to a place where less and less people are required or needed or paid to do the stuff they did. And I don't know what the solution is going to be. There's a great quote
I still go into the co-op that I used to manage. I go in there a couple of times a day because it's my refuge, and also working from home, it's also a place to uh, you know talk to people that I know. It's my neighborhood hub. But there's a lot of artists and freaks that all hang out there. And one of the guys said to me, he's like, it's funny. I saw this meme, and we have trained our robot overlords to, instead of to do the jobs that that we don't want to do so that we can make art and music and literature, we've instead created robots to do the things that we actually enjoy.
Yeah. In fact, today somebody posted in Facebook, throwing all these different groups, but it was a kind of a picture of a rendition of Batgirl,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of like gothic setting,
Mm-hmm.
and people are going on and on about it, and some saying negative, some saying positive. I'm looking at this, and it was signed at the bottom, like this is obviously a Midjourney
Mm-hmm.
product.
Yeah.
Nobody had a clue. And I'm looking at all the telltale signs. You know what I mean? It's just like there's a bunch. They didn't even bother cleaning up the noise. The streets are too narrow. I mean, there's a plant in the middle of nowhere.
Yep.
But people, when I look at this, it's like we are. I mean, as far as the war's lost. I mean, at this point is because you can have really bad renditions of Midjourney images at this point, and most people are fine with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I as I said, it's like when people first started posting stuff from Midjourney, I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. Um, but then I saw all of my friends that were artists, and in in becoming a game designer, you end up building these relationships with people. And this is, for some of them it's their side gig, but for some of them it's their livelihood. And so you see these very emotional posts about uh, stealing their jobs. And it's one of those things where it's like, no, I want to make sure that people, the people that make this art that I love, I want to make sure that they keep making this art for, you know, as long as I'm doing this. And so, I, for me, at least for now, have drawn the line in the sand that I'm just going to stick to working with artists.
Well, like what Google's doing, from what I understand, it's gone is for their marketplace. You can take a picture of your product, and then it will do, like, how I do the mock-ups in
Mm-hmm.
Photoshop. It'll do like mock-ups in different scenes, and so you can have it like in a library or whatever. I mean, it's not necessarily with people in it, but simply like as far as product photography goes, you know that's going to go by the wayside. Which I've done product photography myself for freelance work, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like I mean, I could probably do the same thing, but it take me hours and hours and hours and hours of just to do something where it's like click click click, it's going on my Kickstarter page.
Yep.
And I don't know, it's kind of hard because, well, going back with the advent of digital cameras and with Photoshop and Lightroom and the ability to process, they came out with a lot of these stock photo sites that are like Shutterstock,
Mm-hmm.
killed a lot of people making livings off of product photography.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, I don't necessarily want to live in a world where things don't progress, but at the same time, and certain jobs are always going to become obsolete. But I don't want artists to be one of them. And it's interesting when you were talking about the product art. I have a folder of things that I kept from the 70s and 80s, and I was flipping through it the other day, and I have the instruction manuals for assembling the Death Star station, and a bunch of other Star Wars toys. And all of those instruction manuals were hand drawn.
Yeah.
And so it's like I remember showing somebody the cover of the instruction manual for assembling the Hoth battle play set, and somebody said to me, "Man, you should scan that and put that on a shirt because I would buy that." It's I can't say that I haven't thought about it, even though it's not my art to use. But the fact of the matter is somebody drew,
Yeah.
these action figures on this in this battle play set, and it's awesome. And the fact that that isn't a thing anymore really is kind of sad. Because I mean, yeah, it's sad that that product, that bit of art, it was lost to product photography and is now lost to whatever.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting if you think about, so I guess the advances have kind of gone twofold. Like, you and I are now able to produce zines of sufficient quality of art and production that would have cost way too much money 20 years ago, 30 years ago. This would not have been affordable for us, right?
You do. I don't think that I do. But part of that is also like if if I had stumbled into the zine culture around RPGs 20 years ago, it my zines just would look more like the punk zines that I did in the 90s.
Right. But I guess, but I'm saying, as far as the way we're doing it now, as far as the cost for the typesetting,
Yeah.
if you look at like commissioning art, getting the artists properly scanning, whatever all that entails,
Yeah.
and for the limited runs that we're doing, it we would not be able to do it. What we would be doing is going back to the way it was done.
Yeah.
But the problem is now is the advances made it so we can do this much cheaper. But the flip side is the expectation is that you have that same level of quality.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of created this whole, well, I say quality. I don't want to say quality. Production values. Let's put that because quality is not. I don't want to place judgment on it, because it could be better quality back in the day, and all they were doing is using a typewriter and whatever. So, but the problem is now we're, in a sense, there's a feeling of being constrained to have to using these to be able to compete. So it's kind of created this two-edged sword. We're able to make better, or we're able to make more professional looking stuff cheaper, and able to produce it. But yet we're also, the idea is to actually go the other direction. Unless you create an aesthetic that people like and want to buy, if you do that, then you're probably not going to do as well.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like this whole thing. It's like, well, the allure, I think, of AI art is that you're able to produce a lot of images cheaply.
Yeah.
But the reason you're wanting to produce a lot of images cheaply is because the feeling that you need images in your product to be able to sell your product.
Yeah.
But, going back 30 years ago, nobody knew you could afford it, and nobody expected it, other than just an occasional blip here or there.
Yeah. I mean, when I like, now I find artists now artists, thankfully, some of them come and find me. But when I started, I would find them on Instagram. But I think back to when I used to go to gaming stores in the 80s and 90s, and there would be a sign posted that said character portrait commission artist. And so there would be a person that had stuck a thing on the board with the little pull tabs, and if you wanted to get your character rendered in pen and ink by somebody that was capable, you would pay money to somebody whose phone number you pulled down from the wall at the game store. So it's just interesting, some developments have been for the better for artists and for everyone involved. In some developments, it's like, we'll see how this all shakes out in the end. But
Yeah.
going back real
Go
quick
ahead.
to the typewriter, it just made me think about here in Milwaukee this month, there is a typewriter fest where it's going to be a 1 day event in celebration of creating on a typewriter.
I really am tempted, and maybe I will do this someday, is I would like to kind of go old school, which I've never done with the zine.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even because I wouldn't do it because my typing was so terrible in school, but maybe even hire somebody to actually use a typewriter, type the whole thing out, and then scan it in.
One of the punks that I was friends with back in Chicago when I was living there, he was really into the punk scene culture, and he decided to uh, just do a couple of pages of his. Originally, he was going to do the entire zine with a typewriter, and then he switched to just doing a couple of pages because he realized how much more work, especially as somebody who was not a capable typist, to do even just a few pages using a typewriter. That wasn't just a bunch of X's over things.
Yeah,
Or
well, the other thing people probably don't realize that are too young is that once you got to the end of a line, a bell would ring, and that
yep,
bell would tell you only have so many characters left, and you're at the end.
yep,
So at that
I
point, you better
remember.
figure out if you're going to need to hyphenate or not hyphenate.
Yep, I remember this. It's funny, going back to that collection of ephemera from the 70s and 80s. I have a couple of the card backs from the Star Wars figures from the time. I have like Lando Calrissian and Boba Fett and a couple others, and the proof of purchase seals are cut out. And I remember my mom sitting me down at the typewriter and me writing the letter myself on the typewriter to Kenner, sending my 5 or 6 proof of purchase seals to get my Boba Fett with the launching missile that, of course, had been recalled or whatever before it was ever shipped.
So
But
that was right at the time when they had the kids choking on the
choking
yeah.
hazard, yes.
I was telling somebody about that the other day.
Yeah, no, I mean that was like between that, like I had a bunch of Micronaut action
Oh,
figures
yes.
that had launching
Yes.
things.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, I sat there at the typewriter with my mom's guidance, and I typed out letters to Kenner, and Hasbro and what have you in order to send my proof of purchase seals to get X, Y, or Z special offer. And yeah, it was a lot more work than sitting at your word processor, even on a Commodore 64, which was what we graduated to from there, and then with a dot matrix printer to what we have today. But
Yeah, quite an ordeal. So yeah, and I think right, it is so much time. And that might be something I might pursue. I don't know. It seemed like there's a number of people who have kind of done retro, like even with Mothership, with the art style, of just kind of a really I don't know, more simplistic, but it definitely is a more I don't know how to describe it. It's
sketchy.
like,
It's
yeah,
it's
very sketchy. Yes,
it's
exactly.
yeah, it's sketches.
Yeah, but obviously the amount of time they spent in layout was tremendous. So
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
so I don't know. Yeah, that maybe I think a project we'll see. Put it in
It's
the in.
it's it's definitely worth toying with to see if you should try like doing like a pamphlet encounter, and just use it, first practice with typing, and then do like just a pamphlet using the typewriter, and see if you could handle going at it for anything longer than that.
No, I'll pay. What I think I'm gonna do is I'd actually pay somebody to type.
Oh
No, I'm
gee.
not gonna type. I am no good night. I am terrible, terrible. I don't mind there being mistakes, but even just I'm a reasonably quick typer, but I still make a lot of mistakes while I'm typing. So it's no. Oh my goodness. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I think it's also there's a certain impetuousness that I have too. I don't know if I could click, click, click because I would be much slower, and it kind of eats at me.
Yep, I get that.
But you're right. I think doing the pamphlet, I was trying to think how I could do this, but who knows? Maybe a pamphlet would be a good way of doing that.
Yeah, do a pamphlet connected to Scoundrels of Brixton.
Yeah, that's kind of it's going to be interesting. And that's another thing I've not really have looked at is pamphlets, which I probably need to. Yeah, I just there's a lot of things to explore.
Yeah.
There's a lot of spaghetti to throw at walls. It's just and that seems to be a very reasonable way because I thought about doing like a trifold um, format for something.
Mm-hmm. It's a fun challenge. Like I the first one I did, Cacophonous Bandits, the some people will do an entire adventure on a pamphlet, and I'm like, I'm just gonna do an encounter because that, and even with that, I felt like I was so constrained with what I wanted to say. And so then I did a second one, which became Desperation of the Hungry, which is now a 20-page zine. But the original version of it that I ran for the first couple of play tests was on a pamphlet. And I was like, I need more information on here. And so then it became a 20-page zine.
Yeah, and I've had that happen. Where it's project a scope creep. So, but
Yeah.
I think having constraints has a thing. It's just that you didn't have the right product for a pamphlet apparently to have 20. But yeah, and some people are able to condense things down and be fine. It's kind of just interestingly, even scopes for adventures from people writing incredibly verbose styles to people being incredibly sparse, and there's a market for both and everything in between. But it's just trying to figure where that sweet spot is. But I guess it's a certain amount of personality and what we're wanting for our product, and I guess what the customers want.
Yeah. That's, one of the things that I ran into, and I apologize, we're getting long. But when I did Desperation of the Hungry as a pamphlet, it's like the thing is that it's an encounter of it's basically bandits attacking a house and you defending the house. And essentially it was one of those things where if I kept it in pamphlet form without giving much explanation, it would be the same as any other generic
Right.
bandit encounter. And it was only when making it more prescriptive. All right, this is what the bandits are gonna do on round one. This is what the bandits are gonna do on round two. This is what they're gonna do on round three, and this is what they're gonna do on round four. Because on one hand, the GM can make up all that stuff, and a really imaginative GM will take those bits and pieces and the names and just little personality bits, and they'll craft it into something on the fly. And then there will be other people that will look at that pamphlet and it'll just be another throwaway encounter. And I didn't want it to be a throwaway encounter. I wanted it to be something memorable. And so I turned it into this prescriptive thing.
Well, the thing is, if I'm going to buy something, I want it to be, I want that person's personality come through. Because I don't want to be. I mean, and for me, that's how you also learn. But if you want, whoever you're buying from, right, just a random general encounter doesn't really mean much. But if you want the adventure to be such that somebody else would have written and have that experience of running it, and for people to play in that, that's it's kind of like going back to some of these old modules. It's like the stuff that I really don't think that a lot of the Gary Gygax novels or modules were necessarily that interesting, but they do, especially certain ones, provide a certain experience.
Yeah.
And you could change them up and modernize them, do whatever, but that's not the experience of what was it like to run a Gary Gygax module, and what so not that every module has to be ran that way, or you have to run every one, but sometimes you just want to run it and say, this I played in a James Ward game, of Gamma World fame.
Yeah.
And I had certain ideas about Gamma World. I heard people saying other things about Gamma World, like, "Oh, it's just a joke," and it was wacky the whole time, which I didn't. When I was playing it when I was younger, I didn't feel it was wacky. I mean, it's unusual, it was weird,
Yep.
but it wasn't. There's no ha ha.
Yep.
And then I played it with James Ward, which wasn't Gamma World, but something kind of like Gamma World. I realized, no, those people are wrong. There was no ha ha ha. It is played straight. It is very much a very lethal. Yeah, they're bunny rabbits. Yes, they'll turn your guns into rubber, but they'll just kill you just the same. And they're
Yep.
not like there's no joke. There's no
Yeah.
like punchline. It's just but there's value in playing that. I don't necessarily want to play in James Ward games anymore, but I got to play in one and I got to
Yeah.
experience what that meant.
That's an issue. Like I watched the first half because I got tired and fell asleep. But I watched the first half of the D&D movie. I streamed it last night, the new one, and a lot of people really like that movie. They're really really happy with it in terms of what it provided, and uh, I thought it was too silly. Like I know that things get silly at even at my game table with my grim dark content. I don't need to write comedy in to my content because the players are going to inject that all on their own.
Right.
But because they wanted to in the movie capture there were a couple of things that were said that were like witty banter that I would expect at the game table. And that was something that they were trying to capture with this movie. But a lot of it just felt too silly to me. But I guess that's because that's not how I see D&D. It's just something that they leaned into something that happens at the table, but isn't necessarily what happens all the time at my
Well,
table.
yeah, and I think I've not seen it. I do want to see it.
Yeah.
But the movie wasn't for us.
No. Yeah, no,
Really.
I know some 20-year-olds that absolutely loved it.
Yeah, yeah. It's for the non-gamers mainly,
Yeah.
with a few tokens thrown in for us. Yeah, it's weird. It's hard to probably find the fantasy movies that we're really looking for, but they wanted Guardians of the Galaxy is what they wanted. They wanted $1 billion movie.
Yeah.
So
Whereas the new
and
Guardians of the Galaxy, I paid the money to go see that in the theater, and I absolutely loved it.
yes,
Um,
I saw your Twitter response. Like,
but it's because it is a movie that I didn't think would exist because it's basically an animal rights movie, because it's all about the torture that Rocket Raccoon went through. So yeah,
yeah, I'm interested to see that.
heavy themes, but with all of the lighthearted chosen family Guardians of the Galaxy banter thrown in.
Well, the thing is it I have not seen it yet, that either. But I think in some ways there are good ways to for people to put out their viewpoints in a way that's entertaining and somewhat serious,
Mm-hmm.
or not. When I say serious, not demeaning in a way,
Yep.
but not also come over as like overly preachy. And I think that's probably the better way to reach people than to just kind of some stuff. It's just like hitting people over the head, or
Yeah.
it's like
Well, that's one of the interesting. Like I looked it up after to I'm like, is James Gunn vegan? And the response that I saw were that his brother is in most of his movies and is either vegan or vegetarian. But there was no indication that James Gunn leans that way. And there's like an one of the post credit scenes like pulls the punch of the movie by there's like a bunch of animals charging towards Rocket Raccoon and the new Guardians of the Galaxy, and one of the characters says, "Don't you feel bad about killing these innocent animals?" And Rocket Raccoon just kind of gives a shrug, and so it really kind of like somebody responded on Twitter that it kind of undermined some of the messages in the movie, but I think that's because the person that was making this movie liked the themes
Yeah.
and they probably came from the comics, but wasn't necessarily trying to make an animal rights movie. But they have enough of a context base from, I'm sure, the stories in the comic book, leaned into certain things about vivisection and what have you, and then they just wanted to make a movie about this tragic storyline, not really thinking about the broader implications of it.
Well, it's kind of interesting because I just we finished watching. We watched Nope.
Yep.
And it's my first actually, I think, Jordan Peele film I've seen.
Mm-hmm.
And then after having watched it, then I saw, I want to understand like what was these different things he was going after.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody kind of posted all these different themes, and they also said, well, he also just wanted to make a summer horror movie.
Yeah.
And I thought, this really works. This is really perfect.
Yeah.
It's like the theme here, and the theme here. Like that is really cool, but it's also just a very enjoyable movie. And there was nothing hitting over the head, but yet, if you want to look, there are things there, maybe not in the foreground, but it's just like, yeah, it's reflecting on it. It's like, yeah, that's really kind of cool. Whether or not that was his intent on all these things, maybe not, but it's fun when you can have layers to shows. But yeah, I think Nick, I think you're right. We're getting close to the time-space continuum.
Yeah, I can talk. I'm sorry.
No, it's as bad as there's that one fellow Vasily that we went for 3 hours. It was insane. But anyway, thanks for joining. I'll have to have you on again.
Yeah, it was awesome rambling with you.
Yes, we went full ramble. So anyway, yeah, so you got Kickstarters not going on right now, but coming someday in the future.
Yeah, the next thing is going to be about elementalists, wizards that focus on elemental magic. Still
Fun.
ties into Stennard content, but that will be either late this month or early July.
So I'm planning July for Gary's Appendix 3. So
awesome.
So who knows? Maybe we'll be competing the dollars. Maybe we'll have to have you on for that too.
Very good. I'd love to.
Okay. Well, you take care, Nick.
Yeah, you too.